I learnt to read barns the way other women read faces. This one. This one smelled like safety, like dry hay and warm cattle and the kind of quiet that meant nobody was angry nearby. The wind outside was the kind that don't just blow at cuts. February in Wyoming territory, and the cold didn't touch your skin so much as it settled inside your bones and made a home there, like it planned to stay longer than we ever could. Louisa held the lantern, 4 years old, and her little fist was shaking, but she held it. That's my girl. That's all my girls and my boy, they hold things. They hold on. Tomas sat against the hay bale with his eyes fighting sleep. 10 years old and trying so hard to be the man of our family that it broke something in me every time I looked at him. Katerina curled around her little sister like a question mark. 7 years old and already learning that the world was shaped like the word no. I counted their breaths. 1, 2, 3, all breathing, all alive. That was my currency now, not pesos, not dollars, not the silver ring Miguel gave me the day we married. Just breaths. 2 months we'd been walking. 2 months since the stampede Miguel took him so fast he didn't even get to say my name. I heard about it from a ranch hand who couldn't look me in the eye. After that, everything moved like water through my fingers. The ranch foreman said a Mexican widow couldn't hold the deed. The bank agreed. The town agreed. Everyone agreed except me. And my agreement, it wasn't required. So we walked. You learn things when you walk with 3 children through winter. You learn which churches will feed you and which ones will pray for you, and those ain't the same thing. You learn that a merchant's wife in Silver Creek will throw wash water at you if you stand too close to her door. You learn that no room means not for you. Binge. You learn to read a doorway the way a deer reads a clearing, how wide it opens, how fast it closes, the distance between the threshold and the road. Most doors closed before I finished my first sentence. The hay was warm, though. I'll give this barn that much. Cattle on the other side of the wall breathed their slow heat through the boards, and if I pressed my back against the wood, I could feel it, that dull, living warmth that don't ask nothing from you. Hay dust caught in whatever moonlight found the gaps between planks, little gold specks floating. Louisa watched them like stars. "Mama," Katerina whispered, "how long can we stay?" "Shh, mija, sleep now." I didn't answer because I didn't have an answer. We'd stay until someone found us. Then we'd run again. That was the rhythm rest. Discovery. Run. Like breathing. Except each breath got shorter. Then I heard it. Boots on frozen ground. Heavy. Steady. A man's walk purposeful. Not drunk. Not stumbling. The barn door handle rattled, and I was already moving. Already putting my body between that door and my children. Already arranging my face into the expression I'd perfected across 3 counties, humble enough to earn pity, proud enough to keep dignity, desperate enough to mean it. The door swung open, lantern light his lantern, bigger than ours, flooded the space and found my children's faces, blue from cold, streaked with dried tears. Louisa's ragdoll clutched against her chest, its button eyes staring at nothing. He was tall, dark coat, good boots, a man with money enough to keep leather oiled in winter. His face did what I expected first: anger, jaw tight, eyes hard. Trespassers, I knew that word in 2 languages. Then Louisa whimpered, and his face, it did something I didn't expect. It cracked, just for a second, like a frozen creek giving way, and underneath was something raw I couldn't afford to name. I pulled my children closer. Tomas was awake now, standing, his small fists at his sides. "Please, sir." My voice came out steady. "I'd practiced this. Don't send us away. We got nowhere else." He held the lantern up, looked at Tomas, at Katerina, at Louisa with her rag doll. Looked at me, really looked. Not through me, not past me, but at me, and I don't know what he saw. A Mexican widow with 3 shivering children and everything she owned in a canvas bag. He said one word, come. 30 steps from the barn to the house. I know because I counted them. I counted everything back then, steps, exits, seconds between a man's expression changing, 30 steps across frozen ground, and each one felt like walking into someone else's dream where any moment you'd wake up on the cold side of the door again. He walked ahead. I kept my children behind me, Tomas carrying Louisa, Katerina gripping my skirt so tight I could feel her fingernails through the fabric. The house was big, 2 stories, white paint going grey in places, a porch that wrapped around like arms, warm light in the windows, a house that had been something once and was now just existing. I recognized that too. The kitchen door opened to heat and the smell of bread. A woman stood at the stove, round-faced, grey-haired, flour on her apron, Mrs. Pearson. She looked at us the way you'd look at stray cats come in from rain. Not surprised, not angry, just practical. "Sit 'em down," she said to the man. "I got stew still warm." No questions. That was the thing that undid me more than anything. She didn't ask where we came from or what we were doing in the barn or why a Mexican woman was walking through Wyoming in February with 3 children and no husband. She just set bowls on the table and poured warm milk and sliced bread thick and put it all down like it was obvious. Like feeding cold children was just what you did. Katerina ate so fast she got hiccups. Tomas ate slow, watching the man, watching the door, doing his own counting. Louisa ate with one hand and held her rag doll with the other. I ate last. I always ate last. The man, Henry Ashworth, his name was stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall, arms crossed. He watched my children eat the way you watch a fire catch something between fascination and grief. Maybe, like watching children eat in his kitchen reminded him of something he'd lost. I didn't ask. Asking questions was a luxury for women with addresses. My children fell asleep by the fire, all 3 in a tangle of borrowed blankets. Louisa's rag doll wedged between Katerina's arm and Tomas's shoulder. I sat in a chair near the door. I would not sleep. You don't sleep in a stranger's house. That's a rule I learned in Silver Creek. Learned it the hard way. Learned it once and permanently. Through the kitchen window, I could see a fence along the east pasture. Broken. 3 rails hanging loose. 1 on the ground. Neglected. Not the kind of neglect that comes from poverty, the kind that comes from a man who stopped looking at the edges of his own life. I filed that detail away. Silently. Instinctively. The distance from the chair to the back door, 12 steps. The window latch old but functional. The road visible from the porch. Dawn came slow and grey. Mrs. Pearson started coffee. The man's boots sounded on the stairs. My children still slept. No one told us to leave. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, and I did not know what to do with a morning that held no rejection. He said it plain, I'll give him that. No preamble, no charity face, no you poor dear wrapped in a smile that meant something else. We were standing in the kitchen well. He was standing. I was already cleaning, because idle hands get noticed and noticed women get questioned and questioned women get sent away. I need someone to manage this household, he said. Place has been fallen apart since my wife passed. 4 years now, Mrs. Pearson cooks, but the rest of it. He gestured at the house like it exhausted him. You speak 2 languages. You kept 3 children alive through winter. You're more qualified than anyone I've met. I stopped wiping the counter, looked at him for the first time, really looked. Not the quick survival glance I'd been giving him. He meant it. He wasn't offering this out of pity. He was offering it because his house was falling apart and he'd recognized competence the way a rancher recognizes good stock. Practical, almost blunt. Wages, I said. Not charity. Wages, he agreed. My children will earn their keep. Tomas can work the stable. Katerina can help Mrs. Pearson. They won't be in the way. Fair enough. That was it. No negotiation. No conditions. Just fair enough. And that unsettled me more than if he'd argued. Men who argue, I understand. Men who simply agree, those are the ones you can't predict. So I worked like my life depended on it. Because it did. I scrubbed floors that were already clean and then scrubbed them again. I reorganized Mrs. Pearson's pantry by type, by season, by frequency of use. I mended curtains that only had small tears. I tightened every loose hinge in that house until the doors swung silent. My hands were my testimony. Every board I scrubbed, every hinge I fixed, every curtain I mended was proof that he did not make a mistake. Lye soap burned the cracks in my knuckles, winter split skin that hadn't healed since October, and I didn't stop. Because stopping meant sitting, and sitting meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering that this was borrowed. All of it. Borrowed. I kept my children quiet. I told Tomas, don't run in the house. I told Katerina, don't sing where he can hear you. I told Louisa to stay close. Invisible children survive longer. That's not something I learnt from a book. That's something I learnt from every parlour and porch and pantry where a woman looked at my children's brown skin and decided we'd overstayed. Through the kitchen window, the broken fence caught afternoon light. I looked at it the way you look at a wound you ain't ready to tend, with recognition and distance, both at once. Mrs. Pearson set a fourth plate at the kitchen table that evening. Didn't say a word, just placed it between Katerina's and the empty spot where nobody sat. I stared at that plate like it was written in a language I used to speak but had forgotten. Weeks passed. I'm not sure exactly when I stopped counting the days, somewhere between the second Sunday and the first time Katerina laughed loud enough to fill the hallway. Henry Ashworth was a quiet man. Not the mean kind of quiet, not the dangerous kind. The kind that comes from being alone so long that words feel like furniture you forgot how to arrange. He ate alone most mornings, just coffee and whatever Mrs. Pearson set in front of him, and he'd be out the door before full light, working cattle with his hands, who called him boss, with more respect than warmth. I watched him the way I watched everything carefully, from the edges. He spoke to his horses different than he spoke to people. Softer, like the words mattered more when the listener couldn't repeat them. He had a chair at the table, his wife's chair, Mrs. Pearson told me once, quiet-like, and nobody sat in it. 4 years empty, the wood still polished, still pulled out slightly, like someone might come back. I recognised that chair. I had my own version, the space on the left side of whatever bed I slept in, the side where Miguel used to lie. He had this way of rubbing his thumb across my knuckles before sleep. Slow circles, like he was writing something only my skin could read. I still slept on the right, still left room, still woke sometimes with my hand open on the empty sheet, waiting for circles that wouldn't come. My children unfolded, that's the only word for it, like flowers pressed flat inside a book, and someone finally opened the pages. Tomas started helping in the stable, really helping, not the careful, quiet helping I'd instructed. He asked questions, he ran. Katerina picked wildflowers from the field behind the house, put them in a jar on the kitchen table every morning. One evening, Mrs. Pearson caught me watching Katerina arrange purple clover in the jar, my face doing something I couldn't control. "Child's got an eye," Mrs. Pearson said, not looking up from her bread dough. "Reminds me of someone I lost, the wanting to make things pretty part." "She gets it from her father," I said. And it came out before I could stop at the truth, unguarded, offered to this flower-dusted woman who had never once asked me to explain myself. Mrs. Pearson nodded, kept kneading. "Good man, then." "Yes," I said. "He was." And that was all. But it was enough. 2 women in a kitchen, speaking about loss in the shorthand that only women who've carried it understand. Louisa followed Mrs. Pearson everywhere, like a small brown shadow with a ragdoll, singing fragments of lullabies, Duérmete mi niña, in a voice so small it made Mrs. Pearson's eyes go glassy. Henry watched them too. Henry. One evening at supper we ate together now, All of us, Katerina told a story about a rabbit she'd seen near the fence line, and Louisa laughed so hard milk came out her nose. And Tomas tried to look dignified but failed. And something crossed Henry's face. Raw and hungry and sad all at once. He turned to the window before I could read it fully. But I'd seen it. The way you see lightning quick. Gone. But the shape burned into the dark behind your eyes. That evening, Katerina placed a wild flower on the empty chair, Henry's wife's chair, purple prairie clover, small and stubborn. Nobody moved it. My hands gripped the edge of the table. My breath held so long my chest ached. It happened on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were wash days. And my arms still ached from wringing sheets when I heard Louisa scream. Not the sharp scream of pain, the ragged, breathless scream of a nightmare, the kind that comes from somewhere deeper than a 4-year-old should know. I was out of bed before my feet knew the floor was cold. Down the hall, hand on her door, but it was already open. And there was Henry, on his knees beside her little bed, lantern on the floor casting shadows up the wall, and his big weathered hands that roped cattle and swung axes, holding my daughter's fingers like they were made of something precious and breakable. "Shh now," he was saying, voice low, rough, like he'd forgotten how to make it gentle and was learning again. "Ain't nothing gonna hurt you. You're safe. You hear me, safe as houses." And Louisa, my baby, the one who'd held that lantern in the barn with her shaking fist, she reached up and grabbed his shirt. Grabbed it the way she used to grab Miguel's, and she said, "Senor Henry, don't go." I stood in that hallway and my hand found the doorframe and gripped it so hard the wood bit into my palm. My body stepped backward 1/2 step, involuntary, the way you pull back from a flame. Because watching my daughter reach for this man was the most terrifying thing I'd witnessed since the day they told me Miguel was gone. Not because Henry was dangerous, because he wasn't. Because my children were building bridges to a life that could be taken, and every bridge they built would have to be burned if we left. And the burning would be worse, so much worse than never crossing at all. He looked up, saw me in the doorway. "She's all right," he said quietly. "Just a bad dream." Louisa was already falling back asleep, her fist still closed around his shirt collar. I waited until she let go, until he stood, slow and careful like a man leaving a church, until he was in the hallway with me, the door half closed, the lantern making our shadows long on the floor. "Mr. Ashworth," my voice was low, shaking, not with anger, with something worse. "My children cannot afford this." "Afford what?" "Attachment." The word tasted like medicine. "If you're going to send us away, and I understand if you are, I need to know now. Before she calls you anything else. Before Tomas learns every horse's name. Before Katerina plants something in that garden she expects to see bloom." He looked at me for a long time. The hallway was dark and narrow, and I could hear Louisa's sleeping breath through the door. "I ain't sent anyone away yet. Isabella." First time he used my name. Not ma'am, not Mrs. Torres. "Isabella, careful," like he was handling something that might shatter. I went to the kitchen, found the copper pot, scrubbed it until my reflection stared back from the metal, distorted, fragmented, a woman caught between a door and a fire, unable to choose. March came, and with it, the need for supplies that couldn't wait. I should have known what walking into town beside Henry Ashworth would cost. A Mexican widow in a white rancher's wagon, dressed in clothes Mrs. Pearson had altered to fit me, my hair braided neat, my children scrubbed clean. Weeks in that house had dulled my vigilance, and I'd forgotten just for a moment what the world looked like outside those walls. The general store went quiet when we walked in, that particular quiet that has weight to it, the kind that sits on your shoulders. Henry headed for the hardware section. I took my list to the counter. The merchant's wife, thin lips, stiff collar, Eyes like two chips of river ice looked right past me, addressed Henry across the store. "What'll you be needin' today, Mr. Ashworth?" I was standing right there, list in hand, money in pocket, words in my mouth. But I was furniture, I was wallpaper, I was something you looked past to find the real customer. I'd survived this arithmetic before. Mexican plus widow plus white man's house equals scandal, equals whisper, equals the kind of math that small towns do when they got nothing else to count. A rancher near the feed bins said something to his companion loud enough to carry "Ashworth's gone soft," taken in strays like his place is some kind of charity home. The way he said strays, slow, deliberate, his eyes cutting toward Tomas by the penny candy. My son's shoulders climbed toward his ears. 10 years old, and he understood every word and every silence. I did not move. My hands stayed at my sides. My chin stayed level. The store sounds, tin cans, boot heels, the creak of the floorboard under the rancher's weight, all sharpened to points. Then I turned. I spoke in English first. Clear and even. "My children are not strays. Sir, they are Torres children. They carry their father's name and their mother's strength, and they speak 2 languages, which is more than some folks in this store can claim." Then I said it again in Spanish. "For me, because some truths need to be spoken in the language of your heart to count." I took my son's hand and walked out. In the wagon, the trembling I'd held back flooded through my fingers. Tomas sat rigid beside me. After a long silence, he said, quiet as a prayer, "Papa would have been proud of you, Mama." I couldn't speak. I held his hand tighter and let that be enough. Henry drove the wagon without a word for a full mile. Then, quiet as a man saying grace. My standing was empty rooms and silence. "Isabella, you filled both." I turned my face to the pasture. The broken fence slid past, still hanging, still loose, and something in my chest recognized it. Something that was whole once, and then wasn't, and nobody had bothered to mend. That night, I heard Henry on the porch, his footsteps heavy with something I recognized, the weight of a man rearranging his loyalties. I did not go to him, not yet. Past midnight, the house was breathing. That's what houses do when everyone sleeps. They settle. They make the small, honest sounds that daylight covers up. I packed by touch. Tomas's boots outgrowing them. The leather scuffed from stable work, from running, from becoming a boy again instead of a small man carrying his mother's grief. He'd said "our barn" last Tuesday, our Katerina's Sunday dress, her pressed wildflowers tucked between the folds, purple prairie clover, yellow blanket flower, one white daisy from the creek. She'd said "our garden" this morning, showed me where she'd planted marigold seeds. They'd bloom by June, if we were still here in June. Luisa's ragdoll on top, button eyes staring up at me. I smoothed the doll's yarn hair and heard my daughter's voice. "Senor Henry, don't go." I closed the suitcase. The click of the latch sounded like a sentence ending. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and argued with myself the way I'd been arguing for weeks. Quietly, desperately, like 2 women sharing one body and only one could win. Leave now. Before they love this place so much the leaving breaks them, but you don't know it'll break them. And you don't know it won't. You trusted the foreman, trusted the bank, trusted that Silver Creek preacher with his prayers and his locked door. Every time you trusted, you fell further. Then the other voice, not Miguel's, not Henry's, mine. The one I'd buried under survival the way you bury seeds under hard ground. Not because you've given up on them, but because the season wasn't right. Every door that closed taught you something. This door has not closed. You are the one holding it shut. I sat there, suitcase at my feet, children sleeping in rooms with doors that had never once been locked against them. The house breathing around me warm, alive, full of the sounds of people becoming a family without anyone's permission. Am I protecting my children from loss? Or am I teaching them that love is something you run from? I didn't unpack. But I didn't wake my children either. I sat on that bed until dawn came grey through the window, suspended between the woman who ran and the woman who stayed, waiting to see which one was brave enough to stand up first. The suitcase sat by the bed. I walked past it, past the kitchen where Mrs. Pearson was starting coffee, past the porch where the cold was sharp but not cruel, past the stable where Tomas was already feeding horses before dawn. My son, who used to sleep heavy, now rose early for animals that weren't his but felt like they were. I walked straight to the broken fence. I'd been looking at it since my first night. Through the kitchen window, from the wagon, in the corner of my eye every time I crossed the yard. 3 rails hanging loose, 1 on the ground. The posts still solid, but the connections failed. A thing that was whole once and then wasn't, and nobody had fixed, because fixing things means admitting they matter. Mending a fence means you plan to stay on one side of it. I got tools from the barn, hammer, nails, a handsaw for trimming. I didn't ask, I didn't announce, I just took them and started working. The first rail was hardest. The wood was cold and my hands were stiff and the nail didn't want to go straight, but I held it steady, set it against the post, swung the hammer. The sound rang out across the morning, sharp, clean, definite. A woman making something whole. Second rail, easier. The wood grain rough under my palms. Familiar working woman textures. The language of hands that have never been idle. Each nail I drove was a word. I choose this. This is mine. I am not asking. I am building. Third rail, arms burning, breath in clouds. But the fence was taking shape, straight, solid, functional, not beautiful. I didn't care about beautiful. I cared about standing. Isabella, Henry's voice behind me. I didn't turn. I set the last nail, drove it home, then faced him, hammer in hand, sawdust on my sleeves, my face. I imagine, looking like a woman who had just made the most important decision of her life while doing carpentry. I spoke first. Before he could offer or frame this as his choice instead of mine. I ain't asking to stay, Henry. First time I used his name. I'm telling you we belong here. My son feeds your horses before dawn because he loves them. My daughter planted marigolds she expects to see bloom. My Louisa dreams safe for the first time since her father died. I did that. We did that, all of us. Together. My voice was shaking, but it was the shaking that comes from saying something true for the first time. If you want us gone, you say it plain, but I am done reading doorways. Henry, I am done making myself small enough to fit through the gap before it closes. Silence. Wind across the pasture. A horse nickered in the stable. Then Henry Ashworth spoke in a voice that cracked down the middle like winter ice giving way to spring. I was afraid you'd go. Every morning I checked to see if your shoes were still by the door. He'd been counting too. Counting my presence the way I'd counted exits. Both of us watchful, terrified, waiting for the other to leave first. I set the hammer down, looked at the fence, mended, standing, not a wall, a boundary the kind you choose. The kind that means this is where my land begins, and I intend to keep it. For the first time in 2 months. I did not calculate the distance to the road. February 14th, same month I arrived, but I was standing different now. I noticed it that morning on the porch, my shoulders back, my feet planted wide, my body taking up the space it was given instead of pressing itself against the railing. I stood the way Miguel used to stand surveying our old ranch, the way a person stands when the ground beneath them is theirs. The house sounded like a home. I know that's a strange thing to say, that you can hear the difference, but you can. A house sounds like walls and wind and the mechanical tick of a clock. A home sounds like Tomas laughing in the stable, his voice cracking because he's 10 and growing. It sounds like Katerina reading aloud to Mrs. Pearson. translating the pretty parts into Spanish because some words are prettier in Mama's language. It sounds like Louisa singing Duérmete mi niña while she sets the table, and Henry humming along off-key from the hallway because he'd learnt the melody by listening through walls. 4 plates at a table, 2 coffee cups at dawn his black, mine with milk, set side by side on the porch rail while the morning came up gold. My herbs grew in the kitchen window, cilantro and oregano and a small stubborn sprig of mint that had no business surviving February but did anyway. Katerina's drawings pinned to the wall horses, mostly, and one picture of all 5 of us standing in front of the house, labelled Mi Familia in careful letters. Henry found me on the porch. I was watching Tomas teach Louisa to balance on the lower rail of the mended fence, holding her hands while she walked it like a tightrope, laughing that full-body laugh of a child who has stopped being afraid. He held something in his hand, small, metal, catching the morning light. "This ain't just my house anymore," he said, and his voice broke on the word anymore, cracked right through the middle. "It's yours. A key, not to a room, to the house. The front door, the whole thing, the whole life contained within those walls. I took it. I held it in my palm and felt the weight so small, lighter than Louisa's ragdoll, but heavy. Heavy the way prayers are heavy when they're finally answered. Heavy the way a future feels when you realize you have one." I did not cry. I had cried enough. In barns and on roadsides and in kitchens at midnight with a suitcase at my feet. Instead, I smiled, and the muscles in my face almost didn't remember how, like, finding a road you haven't walked in years, overgrown but still there, still solid under your feet. I looked down at my hands holding the key. These hands lie cracked, calloused, strong. They had scrubbed and mended and hammered and held 3 children through the coldest winter of our lives. They had gripped door frames in fear and copper pots in grief and a hammer on the morning I decided to stop running. They were not small hands. They had never been small hands. I had only tried to make them so. I closed my fingers around the key and held it against my chest. Out in the yard, Louisa lost her balance on the fence rail and fell into Tomas's arms. Both of them laughing, Katerina came running from the kitchen with wildflowers in both fists. Mrs. Pearson called something about breakfast from the window. The mended fence stood behind them in the morning light, not perfect. The new nails visible, the wood not quite matching, but whole, standing, chosen. I watched my children on land that held their footprints now. This porch I'd first approached as a stranger, frozen, frightened, rehearsing the words, "Please don't send us away." I whispered in Spanish a prayer of arrival, not a plea this time, not a request, just a woman, standing full height in the February sun, saying the truest thing she knew: "Ya estamos en casa." We are already home.